She wore an ID badge with a fake first name. Nobody at St. Miriam's knew that. They knew her as Nurse Callie, quiet, forgettable, the one who never spoke unless spoken to. The one who flinched when doors slammed too hard. What they didn't know was that 6 years ago, that same woman had carried a wounded gunner 200 yards under mortar fire. Nobody knew that. Not yet. Then a little girl in a hospital hallway looked up at her with her father's eyes, and asked one simple question. "Can I sit here?" And everything Callie had spent 6 years burying started to surface. Hey everyone, welcome back to Silent Heroes. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Now back to Callie. St. Miriam's Medical Center sat on the edge of a mid-sized city, the kind of hospital that saw everything from broken wrists to gunshot wounds, but rarely anything extraordinary. Callie Reyes, that was the name on her badge, the name she'd built her second life around, had worked there for 8 months. She was 29, though something in her eyes made people guess older. A thin white scar traced her left eyebrow, easy to miss unless you were looking. Her hands were steady in a way that unsettled some of the older nurses, steady in moments when everyone else's hands shook. She had learned the fastest way to survive was to make herself small. No eye contact that lingered too long. No stories about her past. When coworkers asked where she was from, she gave vague answers, moved around a lot, and changed the subject. She kept her hair pulled back tight, wore plain scrubs 2 sizes too big, and never, ever let anyone see her run. Nobody knew that for 6 years, she had been someone else entirely. A combat medic, attached to a naval special warfare unit. A woman who had stitched wounds under fire, and called in medevacs with her own blood soaking through her sleeve. She had a name once that made grown men go quiet in a briefing room. Now she was just Callie, the rookie nurse who restocked supply carts and kept her gaze on the floor. Dr. Preston Holloway ran the ER like it was his personal kingdom. 52, silver-haired, always in a coat pressed sharp enough to cut. He had a habit of humiliating junior staff in front of patients, a public correction here, a sharp word there, always delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Reyes," he'd say, drawing her name out like a punishment, "try to keep up this time." He built his reputation on making other people look small, so his own shortcuts and missed calls stayed invisible. Ambition wearing a white coat. There was one person who saw through her. Mrs. Delgado, 78, a recurring patient with a bad hip and a sharper mind than half the doctors on staff, caught Callie's wrist one afternoon as she checked her 4-line. "You're not just a nurse," the old woman said, quiet, certain. "I don't know what you are. But you're not just this." Callie said nothing. She just adjusted the 4 and left the room a little too fast. She would remember that moment. Later. When it mattered. By 7:14 that morning, the ER doors burst open. A gurney came through fast, flanked by paramedics shouting vitals. A man in his 30s, tactical pants, a burned scar on his forearm, blood soaking through a hastily wrapped bandage at his side. Beside the gurney walked a little girl, maybe 4 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit, and a German shepherd in a service vest that would not stop pulling toward the bed. BP's dropping, 88/52 and falling, a paramedic called out. Dr. Holloway strode in, chest first, already talking. "Stab wound, left flank, likely superficial. Get him prepped for standard suturing." Callie's stomach dropped. She looked at the wound. Looked at the man's color, pale, sweating, breathing too fast for superficial. Looked at the canine's behavior, refusing to sit, nose pressed low toward the man's abdomen, not the wound site. Internal bleeding. Her mind moved fast, clinical, silent. Dog's not alerting on the visible wound. He's alerting somewhere deeper. Rigid abdomen. Diaphoretic. This isn't a flank laceration. This is a penetrating injury tracking toward the spleen. Holloway didn't see it. He was already reaching for a suture kit. Then the little girl tugged Callie's sleeve. "Can I sit here?" she asked, pointing at the plastic chair beside her father's gurney. Callie knelt down to answer her, and that's when she saw it. A tattoo on the girl's father's forearm, half hidden beneath the blood. A trident. A unit number she recognized instantly, because it had once been stitched onto her own uniform. The word left the girl's mouth without her even knowing what it meant. Daddy calls his friend Doc Ghost. Are you Doc Ghost? The word hit the room like a detonation. Holloway turned. What did she say? Callie didn't answer. Her jaw tightened. Her hands, for the first time in 8 months, stopped shaking, because for the first time in 8 months, they had a reason to be steady. Reyes. What is she talking about? It wasn't a question. It was a command. Callie's eyes moved from the girl, to the dog now sitting rigid and staring at her, to the man on the gurney whose blood pressure was crashing by the second. She said nothing, but something in her had already decided. Move, Callie said. Not loud. Not a shout. Just flat, final. Holloway blinked. Excuse me. He's bleeding internally. The flank wound is a decoy. The blade went deeper, angled up. He's got a lacerated spleen. If you start suturing skin, he dies in this room. A splenic laceration happens when a sharp or blunt force injures the spleen, an organ packed with blood vessels. Left undetected, it can cause silent, massive internal bleeding. The skin may look calm while the abdomen fills with blood. Warning signs include a rigid, tender belly, falling blood pressure, and a racing heart, exactly what was happening in front of them. Every minute of delay narrows the window for saving the patient. Callie's spine had straightened. Her voice had lost its usual quiet edge. The tremor that lived in her hands for 8 months, gone. Get me an ultrasound. Now. And type him for 2 units, Oneg, don't wait on cross-match. A resident nurse froze, then obeyed, because something in Callie's voice left no room for hesitation. Holloway grabbed her arm. You do not give orders in my ER. She looked at him, steady. Then give the right one. Or step aside. The fast ultrasound confirmed it seconds later. Free fluid pooling around the spleen, exactly where she said it would be. The trauma surgeon, paged in a rush, took one look at the screen and called it emergency splenectomy, immediate or transfer. Holloway stood frozen at the foot of the bed, the suture kit still in his hand, uselessly. Witnesses saw it. 2 nurses. A resident. The paramedics still lingering by the door. By 8:30 that morning, hospital security escorted Callie to the administrator's office. Holloway had already filed a report, insubordination, unauthorized diagnosis, endangering a patient by delaying standard protocol. He stood in the doorway while she was told she was suspended, pending investigation. No, Callie said. I am just done hiding. She walked past the administrator, past Holloway, straight back toward the OR doors, where the surgical team was prepping the patient. The man with the trident tattoo, the man who, 6 years ago, she had once pulled off a smoking vehicle with her own 2 hands. A small crowd had gathered by then. Nurses. A janitor. Mrs. Delgado, wheeled out into the hallway by a friend, watching with sharp, knowing eyes. Nobody stopped her. The reinforcements arrived at 9:47 a.m. 2 men in Navy dress uniforms walked through the ER doors, flanked by a liaison officer from Naval Special Warfare Command. One of them, a gray-templed commander, scanned the room until his eyes landed on Callie. Chief Petty Officer Reyes, he said, loud enough for the hallway to hear. Combat Medic, Naval Special Warfare. Bronze Star with Valor Device. Purple Heart. Credited with saving 11 lives during a single extraction in conditions this hospital wouldn't survive for 10 minutes. The hallway went silent. Holloway's face drained of color. She never disclosed. She wasn't required to, the commander said. That patient in Eura right now is one of her old teammates. The K-9 recognized her training scent before any of you recognized her competence. Holloway opened his mouth, searching for footing that no longer existed. I was following protocol. You were following your ego, the commander said. There's a difference. Security escorted Holloway to the administrator's office instead. What came out over the following days was worse than incompetence. An internal audit triggered by the incident uncovered falsified trial data tied to a pain management drug Holloway had been quietly pushing through the ER, a financial arrangement with a pharmaceutical rep, kickbacks disguised as research grants, patients used as unwitting test subjects for a treatment that hadn't cleared proper review. Holloway had never cared about medicine. He'd cared about the payout. 2 nights later, as the investigation closed in, Holloway came to the hospital after hours, desperate, trying to erase the digital trial records before auditors arrived. Callie, back on shift checking on her old teammate, caught him in the records room. He lunged for the door, shoving past her, and knocked over a rolling 4 stand that crashed into a monitor bank, triggering the code alarm across the floor. In the chaos, an elderly patient's line disconnected. Her monitor screamed a flatline warning. Callie didn't hesitate. She sprinted, dropped to the bedside, began compressions. "Come on," she muttered, "not tonight. Not like him." Him. The memory surfaced without permission. Her old team leader, the one she couldn't save on that road 6 years ago. His last words. His name, unspoken for years, rising now like it had never left. Charging to 200, a doctor called. Clear. The monitor blinked. Flatlined. Blinked again. "Come back," Callie whispered. A steady beep returned. "She has a pulse." Not a cinematic victory. Just the truth of it, plain and enough. Holloway was arrested that night on hospital grounds. Fraud, falsified research, and reckless endangerment. His license was suspended within the week, and the board later revoked it permanently. Callie was reinstated, then promoted, appointed head of a new combat medicine transition program at St. Miriam's, training veterans moving into civilian nursing, using both the identity she'd hidden and the one she'd built afterward, together instead of apart. Mrs. Delgado was there the day the program opened, sitting in her wheelchair by the door. "I told you," she said, smiling. "You were never just a nurse." Callie smiled back. "No. I never was. Sometimes the people who seem the smallest are carrying the heaviest things. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet ones who've already survived the worst, still choosing to show up anyway. You don't have to hide who you are to belong somewhere. You just have to stop waiting for permission." If this story moved you, hit that like button, and subscribe to Silent Heroes so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment. What would you have done if you were in that hallway? The next story is already waiting. The end.